Formula One on 5 Live.
Hello and welcome to Bahrain, where we are getting ready for the first round of this record-breaking Formula One season. 24 races coming our way, and it all starts here in Bahrain at the Bahrain International Circuit. And I'm down in the pit lane. It is heaving, it is bustling. There is a real buzz about this season. Will Red Bull still be the team to beat? And I'm standing outside Red Bull's garage, and that was always my plan, because I thought after the 3 days of testing we had here last week that they were the team still to beat. So here I am outside the garage, but I'm outside the garage now for very different reasons. In the last 24 hours, we found out that their team principal, Christian Horner, has been cleared of the allegations that were against him surrounding inappropriate behaviour towards a colleague of his, a female colleague. Yesterday, Red Bull released a statement saying that they had dropped the allegations and that the complainant still has the possibility of appealing. But Christian Horner is here in Bahrain. I am looking at him now. He is standing at the back of Max Verstappen's Red Bull car in the garage. He's talking to one of their number one mechanics from the team. And I have to say, I'm not alone outside this Red Bull garage. The rest of the world's media is here. The photographers are here. They were waiting for him to arrive at the paddock this morning, and now they're here at the garage trying to get pictures of him to be able to send around the world, because this has been a huge story. And joining me, Rosanna Tennant, here in Bahrain, is also our lead commentator for this weekend, Harry Benjamin, racing driver and broadcaster Alice Powell, and the BBC's chief F1 writer Andrew Benson. And as Max Verstappen gets into his RB20, Andrew, this has been a dark cloud hanging over Formula One and Red Bull. The allegations against their team principal, Christian Horner, now the issue has been dropped, but I imagine this is going to rear its ugly head from time to time throughout the season. How have we got to this point, Andrew?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily, Rosanna, say that the issue's been dropped. Red Bull have tried to draw a line under it. They've said they've dismissed the grievance, but the statement they gave yesterday was thin on substance, and that's been remarked upon up and down the paddock. Both Formula One and the FIA, the governing body, have asked for full transparency on this, as indeed have Red Bull's future engine partner Ford. We haven't had that yet. I believe the FIA are extremely likely to ask for the report, so I suspect this story isn't done yet.
Right, well, we will also be keeping an eye on it throughout the season, throughout this weekend in particular. As Andrew said, plenty of goings-on still behind the scene. Alice Powell, as a racing driver, as a female racing driver, what's the racing community been saying about this? Because does the fact that this has sort of been, as Andrew says, they've tried to draw a line under it, but does that mean that other women in the industry who perhaps have faced similar issues are now going to be afraid to speak up, as Christian Horner walks about 5 feet in front of me?
Potentially. I mean, I really hope that is not the case. You know, as we were explaining yesterday on when the news broke and we recorded our short podcast, I was talking about how motorsport is a family, and there are a lot more females in and around the paddock. There are a lot more female mechanics. You know, we've got engineers, and it is a family. But of course, like any workplace can have an incident like this, I just really hope that Red Bull have done the process properly, and that this is the decision that is correct. And like Andrew said, you know, I just hope it's not been swept on the carpet because they want to keep Christian. I really hope it's been dealt with properly, and we've got to trust that process. Will this be it? Probably not. We're going to hear a lot more about it, potentially. The lady in question does have the right to appeal. Will she appeal? We don't know, but I just hope that it has been done properly, and of course, you know, let's hope it doesn't stop other females and males, you know, because it can happen the same way coming forward to make these claims.
Well, Christian Horner has just taken his place on the Red Bull pit wall, so it feels like business as usual. But as I say, it's been a dark cloud hanging over the sport. We are now, though, approaching FP1, the first practice session of the 2024 season. We've seen the cars running in testing, only 3 days of testing, such a short winter test schedule the teams have these days. And lead commentator Harry Benjamin, it's been a short winter break. You've been keeping an eye on everything. I said I was going to stand outside the Red Bull garage anyway today, and that is because it does still look, doesn't it, like Red Bull are the ones to beat. But is the margin as great as it was in 2023, do you think?
If not greater. is the answer to that question, I'm afraid to say. Look, we've seen testing, and that Red Bull RB20, once again designed by the powerhouse that is Adrian Newey, certainly looks like it is going to be the one to beat. They had such an advantage last year anyway. They will, of course, be able to, you'd think, hold that, and if not, extend it. Testing, although they haven't played the full card yet, I think we are about to see that across the course of this weekend. Sergio Perez looks a little bit off Max Verstappen's pace. It's Ferrari who look like they might be the closest to Red Bull, but that gap is still, at the moment, very much in Red Bull's favour. But the green light is on at the end of the pit lane, and we are now kick-starting the 2024 Formula One season. 95 days since the last year's season came to a close. We're back in business for free practice one, and 20 years on since Bahrain first came onto the calendar. 3 different layouts we've raced on, from day race to night race, but it's scorched sunshine for FP1 before the floodlights come on one by one later this evening. It's just after 2:30 in the afternoon local time, and for those who wish to do a sync up, here's your first one of the year. 58 minutes and 44, 43, 42 seconds remain of this free practice one session as Lewis Hamilton makes his way out of that pit lane through turns 1 and 2. The heavy braking zone into turn 1 when he's slinging into the right-hander, and then out through the left-hander of 2 and along through 3, and the DRS zone which takes you down to turn 4. He's being followed by the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz, and of course, well, the biggest winter news was that they are switching places. Not this year, next year. Well, they're not switching places, I should say. Getting ahead of myself there. Carlos Sainz, we don't know where he's going yet. Lewis Hamilton, though, Alice Power, very much going to be in a Ferrari. But that mindset of being with a new team is still a whole season away. He's still got to give his all this year with Mercedes.
Yeah, he does. So Joe is only just out of the pit. He's got a braking issue to deal with already. So he's got the rakes on the car full of sensors to take in as everyone's jostling and just sorting themselves out. But you could say that's quite good planning for Lewis Hamilton. He's planning that far ahead. I don't think I've ever planned that far ahead in advance, but he's a professional. He's a professional driver who's been in Formula One for a great number of years, had a lot of success. He will know that he's got a job to do. He's at the end of the day, he's here to win races. Doesn't matter what team he's with, you want to win a race. You want to pick up those podiums. So doesn't matter if he's in a Mercedes and he's going to be in a Ferrari next year. Doesn't matter. He will still want to give it his all to absolutely make sure he has got the best chance of standing on the top step of the podium. The only thing that might not necessarily help him too much is he might not be getting the full sort of proper lowdown of what their plans might be towards the end of the season with the car and those kind of different directions. But that's not going to, Hamilton's not going to let that affect him. As I said, he's a professional. As Joe is now back into the pits, look like the Kick Sauber team were having a slight issue with the front jack there, but they've instantly, straight away, dived onto the car with the fans to try and get the brakes cool.
I'm sure you would realise by now the wind is very strong.
Lando Norris on the but that's Lando Norris's radio being told the wind is quite strong, and it really is, Alice, isn't it? It's about, what's the timing saying, 10 kilometres an hour southerly wind. Rosanna is, I'm sure, feeling the wind down in the pit lane.
Yeah, it's really gusty, Harry. I'm looking across the start-finish straight where there's an amazing Ferris wheel going round for fans who are here at the circuit to enjoy. But just below that Ferris wheel are lots of trees, and they are really being blown around. And you can even feel it here in the pit lane, which often is very sheltered. But of course, this session, we're in blazing sunshine, but with that gust still running up and down the pit lane as well. And talking of the sunshine, temperatures around 19 degrees air temperature, and the track's running at 36 degrees. But this session is so unrepresentative of what the drivers will have to deal with come qualifying and the race. So it's going to be interesting to see how they approach this one, given that we are only just into FP1 and only just into this new season. Still testing lots of parts, no doubt, as they get to grips with their new machinery.
Thanks, Rosanna. Yeah, the upgrade list for this weekend was lengthy as, and just first timing is coming in. Sergio Perez currently fastest, 1:35.0 on the medium combat tyre. Carlos Sainz in second, 2/10 back. Piastri, Ocon, Norris the top 5. Gasly, Magnussen and Hulkenberg, the 8 drivers who have set lap times. The sound you're hearing is Charles Leclerc, just getting a little bit of a snap in his Ferrari as he comes out of the right-hander of turn 4, runs a little bit wide over the red and white rumble strip, corrects the car and manages to get it back on the straight and narrow. But a little moment there, Alice, for Charles Leclerc.
Yeah, that's a horrible corner, turn 4. I can't imagine many drivers, certainly not my favourite, that's for sure. As you're entering, it's not, the camber doesn't serve you well, so you're either chasing the front or just as you're trying to turn in, the rear wants to come round. And actually for Charles there, he was chasing the front, ran slightly wide, and the rear tried to pivot around on him. As we see, I'm sure George Russell just ran over a slight bit of debris there, so we'll keep an eye on that as he's on the medium tyre at the moment. But just touching on the wind, it is very, very blustery, and it was talked about a lot during testing, the 3 days of testing that we had here last week, and it's a real battle for the drivers, and they will have the teams in their ears keeping them updated about the wind. But you have got a lot of flags around this circuit, and I remember George Russell actually saying once how the flags are a big tool for the drivers, as the sound you can hear now is riding on board with George Russell. He bleeds in through tricky, and that's actually, I think that's probably going to be a tough section for the drivers. Just looking out the window there, they've got a big tailwind going into that corner, so that's going to make it very, very difficult. But with the wind that we have here today, it's a Chamel wind apparently. I don't know if Benny can correct me if I'm wrong, but that traditionally comes with cooler temperatures. So being here in Bahrain, we're not sunning ourselves in high 20s. We are in the low 20s. Gets rather chilly at night, but it does produce a lot of rising sand and high winds during the day. So that's what we're experiencing at the moment. That's what the winds we've got this year. So during free practice 1 and free practice 3, we will have certainly higher winds than we actually get, or we will have for qualifying, free practice 2 and for the race.
My wind name knowledge for Arabic countries is not strong. I know a bit more about desert names than I do about winds, but I can confirm that it's cooler than I've ever experienced in Bahrain at the Grand Prix. I remember in 2009 we were here, it was 40 degrees for the race. Fernando Alonso actually collapsed after that race. No danger of anyone collapsing today. It's still warm in the sun, big blue skies as usual, as you would expect in the desert. But weather aside, Max Verstappen is now on his outlap, and I just want to put a bit of context before we see his first flying lap. I was speaking to a team principal today who wasn't from Red Bull, and he was saying that he thought that Verstappen has half a second on the field heading into this weekend.
Does that include his teammate?
Including his teammate, yeah. So let's see what this first lap is like. What the person did say was that it looks very close behind Verstappen, and that's exactly what we've got right now. Lewis Hamilton's fastest as Max Verstappen starts his first flying lap. He's only 34 thousandths ahead of George Russell and 46 thousandths ahead of Charles Leclerc. So Mercedes and Ferrari looking very evenly matched so far, as everyone believes, behind Red Bull. We think they're behind Red Bull. Let's find out what Max can do on this lap.
Well, Verstappen then, the reigning champion, the defending champion, up through the gears, getting up to over 300 kilometres an hour just as he slams onto the brakes into the right-hander of turn 4, out through the exit where Charles Leclerc and the Ferrari had a little moment a few moments earlier. He's almost 2/10 up on Lewis Hamilton's time in for the fastest lap. Verstappen through the tricky middle sector, the S section before what is actually probably the trickiest corner on the circuit, would you say, Alice, is you're coming into almost a double left-hander for then turns 9 and 10.
Yeah, I mean, I touched on about the wind, and looking out the comms box, it is quite tailwindy going into there, but what adds to the trickiness of that corner is going through turn 9 and turn 10. They're effectively one corner, so you will start the braking as you're going through turn 9, or depending if you've got a better car, you might be able to brake slightly later than that, and you will have lock-on, which means that inside front left, from a driver's point of view, almost becomes slightly light. And the more steering lock you have on, the more brake pressure you have on, the more likely you will to then lock up that inside front tyre, causing a flat spot, you know, and that can be then further down the race, further down the line, your wheel will constantly be finding that flat spot when you come into lock. And we've seen it many times in many of the races, drivers just pushing when they're under pressure. Got the DRS detection zone there going into turn 9, so out of turn 10 you have the DRS straight as well, but drivers locking up, running wide, and then they are under even more pressure down the straight with the driver behind them potentially with DRS. So it is a good place to put people under pressure if you're on the attack.
Well, Max Verstappen made his way around the 5.4 kilometre circuit here, set time of 1:33.9 on that medium compounder tyre, and that is the order of the day so far. Everybody out on that tyre at the moment. His teammate Sergio Perez is going quicker, actually went quicker in the first sector, so see if Perez can hang on to that as he comes through the middle sector. Charles Leclerc is going to be next across the line in the Ferrari. Personal best, but it's only enough for second at the moment, just over a tenth and a half short of Verstappen's time. Then it's Sainz in third, Hamilton, Russell the top 5, Tsunoda in the RB is now 6th in front of Piastri. This is the sound of Sergio Perez as he completes his lap. Let's see where this puts him. He goes up into second, a 1:33.9, 84 thousandths of a second shy of his teammate. So it's the two Red Bulls, 1 and 2. The top 10 is rounded out by Piastri in 8th, Ocon 9th, Stroll 10th, Norris is then 11th, Ricciardo, Gasly, Magnussen, Hulkenberg, the 15 drivers who have all set representative lap times. The two Saubers of Bottas and Joe on an outlap at the moment. Verstappen on the radio. He's saying everything is miles off.
With an added word in there that's, lots of expletives. But
everything is miles off, and then he goes fastest on his first line lap.
But actually, when watching the F3 and F2 this morning, which are a support race to Formula 1 this weekend, and the Porsche Carrera Cup as well, when F3 were out, there was a lot of dust on the circuit, and that's what I'm on about with the wind. Even from walking from having our lunch to the comms box, safe to say mine and Rosanna Hare was definitely not staying in place. It was blowing everywhere, and that you could see Benson, his hair blew off a while ago, so he hasn't got that problem. But the sand, you could see the sand, and actually I wear contact lenses and they actually feel a bit agitated. So the sand is in the air, so the track's not going to be great, and it will reset tomorrow. But these F1 drivers are lucky because they have, you could say, the support series track sweepers of F3 and F2, which do a little bit of sweeping for them before they take to the track.
I just want to come back to Red Bull for a moment, and Andrew, perhaps you're best to come in on this. Just, were you surprised or not that they were the class of the field, obviously, last year, that they come into this new season with this really a radical new design concept, particularly focusing around the side pods? Or is that being overhyped? Or I'm just impressed that everyone thinks that the gap was so large they didn't need to innovate, yet it seems like they have, and they've gone a different way, perhaps more towards what the Mercedes Zero Pod was. But is that the case or not so?
There's an absolute load of nonsense been talked about this Red Bull.
Really?
It is an evolution of last year's car.
Okay.
There's no question about that. It's a very dramatic evolution. They've made some big steps. They've been very aggressive with their design, and that doesn't surprise me, knowing Adrian Newey as long as I've done. As soon as I heard him say that it was going to be an evolution, I thought, oh yeah. And it was a wow moment, as Andrea Stella, the McLaren team principal, put it. But I've read stuff about there being a zero pod like the Mercedes. Absolute nonsense. Just look at the Red Bull. It's still got the side pods on it. I think people have got distracted by the fact that it's got a couple of vertical cooling inlets, which the Mercedes did have at the start of last year and in 2022. The fundamental philosophy of the car is exactly the same. They've just iterated it several steps further in the same direction. It's still a side pod with an undercut, with the idea of which is to direct as much mass airflow through as they can to scavenge the air out of the side of the floor, which what those scoops and turns on the halfway along the floor edge are all about, and also to smooth the airflow beyond that through to the rear of the car so that it creates a low pressure area at the top of the diffuser, which then drags the rest of the air out from under the floor. It's exactly the same philosophy. They've just gone a lot further with it. And I've just been in the pit lane talking to the Red Bull and Mercedes engineers, Paul Monaghan at Red Bull and James Allison at Mercedes, and standing right next to their cars. And you can just see the Red Bull, it just looks like a car almost designed to a different formula. It's just beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And it is jaw-dropping just looking at it. So it's no wonder that it's so fast. And for Max Verstappen to use a swear word to describe how bad his car is feeling right now, but still be 0.6 quicker than everyone on his first flying lap. The field's closed up a bit since then, but he's not done another time, and the others have. I think that just goes to show, A, how far ahead they are. I mean, we'll have to see how the weekend pans out, but that's what everyone expects. But also, what an absolutely amazing job that team under Adrian Newey have done.
It's remarkable what they've achieved. Rosanna's down in the pit lane. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and as we know, a beautiful car is often a fast car, so I will echo Andrew's sentiments. The only thing I wanted to pick up on is, of course, we've got this strange schedule this year. We don't go to Europe quite as quickly as we normally do, so Japan is actually being earmarked as one of the races where teams might bring new packages and upgrades. And the rumour is that if Red Bull do develop their car in a sort of different and unusual direction, perhaps with a slimmed down side pod, it could be Japan where we see that. But the slimmed down side pod, the zero pod, it didn't work for Mercedes. Andrew, what's to say that it could work for Red Bull, or is it going to be the Adrian Newey touch that makes it work?
Look, I don't know what they're going to do with the car. They're obviously going to evolve it through the season, but all I can tell you, Rosanna, right now, as Verstappen goes 0.2 quicker than George Russell with his next flying lap, and the car is described as with a four-letter word, is that it's the same philosophy as they followed before. They've just taken it to a further extreme. That's not to say that's going to carry on that way, but I don't think that we're going to see Red Bull do what Mercedes did with their 2022 car. It's just, I think you've got to remember that what we see on the outside isn't necessarily the most important thing anyway. What's under the floor is going to be really key. That car hasn't been off the track, crashed and then been craned up in the air yet, like it was in Monaco last year, which created another wow moment for Andrea Stella, the McLaren team principal. So let's just see what they do with it. Development is coming, and it's going to be really interesting to see what that development step is. I can tell you that within Red Bull, they do feel that they can see a point where the gains are going to begin to plateau off. At least that's what they say. Whether that's true or not is another matter, but that's what they say off the record, or at least unattributably, certain people there. I'm not sure whether anyone up and down the pit lane is going to really be taking that with too much faith right now.
Andrew, is that because of the punishment that they incurred because of the budget overspend?
No.
Or do you think that's just the convergence of the rules and regs?
It's just that the longer you go through one set of regulations, the harder it is to find gains in theory. And of course, the theory is that because they hit on the right approach to these regulations so quickly compared to everybody else and have been developing ever since, it's harder for them to find the gains because they're sort of closer to the theoretical maximum of the regulations. That's the theory. Of course, in practice, it doesn't always work like that. If you think back to 2013, for example, that was the last year of that particular set of regulations where people were the main aerodynamic driver was something called exhaust blown diffusers at that time. The second.
Cars literally can't be.
That's Verstappen, as usual, complaining about gear shifts, which he's very sensitive to. And sorry for talking over him there, everybody. In 2013, just to finish my point, that was the end of a set of regulations. The games were supposed to be getting smaller, and Sebastian Vettel won all the last 9 races of that year.
Optimism galore for 2024. Rosanna mentioned Japan there, where we might see the beginnings of some more significant upgrades. Just to make you aware, well, the calendar's had quite a big switch up for this year for certain races. Japan a lot earlier now. It'll be round 4 in April. So we start off in Bahrain, then next week we head to Saudi Arabia, week off, then we're in Australia, and then we'll get to Japan before we go to China, Miami, and then Imola kicks off the European season on the 19th of May. And that's in line with the beginning, at least, of Formula One's aim of meeting their sustainability agenda, where we are trying to group countries more regionally to minimise things like air freight and people's teams and people's travel to and from the races. So not long to go until Japan then, as Zhou Guanyu just comes across the line in that fluoro green Sauber, currently down in 18th, finds a little bit of time, only enough for 17th. Andrew.
A point here. Sorry, I went silent for a second there. I don't know why. We've had the first runs, and we got a first sense of how the field lines up, and it's quite interesting. You've got Aston Martin, who everybody wasn't quite sure of. They were a bit under the radar in testing. Fernando Alonso is 5th quickest, only 0.394 seconds off Verstappen. That's encouraging, and that underlines what a few people who looked at the numbers a bit more closely thought, which was that they're probably, or at least the feeling out of testing was that they're the next team after Mercedes and Ferrari. Ferrari, by contrast, haven't been as quick on this first run as you might have expected. Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz down in 6th and 7th places behind Alonso. We've got Red Bull, Mercedes at the front. So it's only a first snapshot, but it's just on the Aston Martin front. I think they're probably not surprised, but from anyone who's interested in Aston Martin, they'll be encouraging for them.
Yeah, especially after this time last year where there was so much hype around them. I suppose unless they make such a leap again, it was always going to be a bit of an understated testing session. 38 minutes and 27, 26 seconds remain of free practice 1. It is Verstappen who is fastest with a 1 at 33.5. George Russell in the Mercedes is second, 2/10 adrift. He's just come into the pits. Then Sergio Perez is third. Hamilton and Alonso round out the top 5. Leclerc, Sainz, Norris, Stroll, Ricciardo, the top 10. Tsunoda, Albon, Bottas, Piastri, Ocon, the top 15. Sargent, Zhou, Gasly, Magnussen and Hulkenberg, the 20 drivers who have now all been out there setting lap times. And, well, there was a little bit of history made coming into this season because this was the first time we've had the same drivers all in the same teams and the same cars at the end of the previous season follow through once again. No driver changes, but there is definitely pressure, isn't there, on certain drivers. If we look a little bit further down the field, silly season this year is going to be brilliant because we have the big hitter of, well, where's Carlos Sainz going to go? And that has implications for the likes of the young F2 Mercedes star Andrea Kimi Antonelli. Fernando Alonso is also, before Hamilton announced his Ferrari contract, 13 drivers were out of contract at the start of come the end of this year. But even further down, the likes of Logan Sargent in his second season with Williams, he's got to perform, hasn't he? And it's this midfield towards the back that looks super tight. So that could be quite difficult for him.
Exactly. I mean, I think he did deserve another chance. I know lots of people said, yeah, but he was so far off Albon. But yeah, there's other factors which come into play, of course, which I'm sure many of you can guess what those are. But he was, I think it's good for him to have another chance. But like you said, Harry, he's under a lot of pressure to perform now. He's got this chance. He needs to step up. He needs to be as close, if not ahead, of Alex Albon, which, by the way, Alex was probably one of the standout drivers for me last year, excluding Max Verstappen, of course, but he did a fantastic job with that Williams. He didn't have, the pressure of a teammate pushing him along, which sometimes can help things, but also can hinder as well if you're trying to make those sort of gains with data to your competitors. But he did a great job. So it's a very important year for Sargent, and as you said, lots of other drivers. Esteban Ocon as well, he's one of those that could be out of contract. Well, he will be out of contract with Alpine, whether he'll continue. So a long list of names, so hopefully there's going to be a bit of swapping about.
So Alice, Sargent brings money, can you confirm that? Because I don't actually know that. I always assumed he must do.
That is what I've heard. Whether we know what this paddock's like, or any paddock's like, whether that is true.
Can't see why he's got the driver if he doesn't, frankly. But
those lower teams, that can help, and as we know, makes the difference. For those that are really struggling for cash, scrapping around for money, which is, I believe, and you'll probably be able to back me up on this, is probably why Schumacher didn't necessarily get the seat, because the amount of crash damage he did in the Haas, which was a lot. Jeddah springs to mind. That was a hefty whack.
Yeah, a combination of lack of pace and too many accidents for Mick Schumacher, I'm afraid. But that paid to his Formula 1 career. I don't think he's going to get another chance, probably. But, you never know. But, the drive market is interesting, Harry. Obviously, the Mercedes and Red Bull seats are the key interests there. Perez is obviously under massive pressure at Red Bull. Christian Horner's made it very obvious at the end of last year that if he doesn't up his qualifying pace, he's in trouble. Mercedes, I'm getting the feeling at the moment that seat's between Andrea Kimi Antonelli, the rising 17-year-old Italian star who's just starting his season in Formula 2, debut season in Formula 2 this weekend here, and Fernando Alonso, believe it or not. After everything Alonso and Mercedes have been through, the mood music on Alonso and Mercedes has changed significantly over the winter now that Hamilton's leaving. I think the real question is Toto Wolff going to feel that Antonelli, whether it's too early for Antonelli to bring him into Formula 1. They think there's a lot of buzz around that guy. I wrote in a story on the BBC Sport website earlier this week. I might as well repeat it on air now. He did a test, people do a lot of practice over the winter in cars that aren't necessarily the ones they're going to race in. He did a test at Silverstone in the wet, in an F3 car with a couple of other very decent Formula 2, Formula 3 level drivers in the same team running at the same time. It was wet. He'd never been to Silverstone before. He was 4 seconds a lap faster than the other two drivers. And the team who ran him are the same team who ran Max Verstappen when he was coming up through the ranks. They did a test at Pembrey in Wales back in the day with Verstappen while he was sort of coming out of karting to see how he was going to get on in cars, and the wow factor they got from Antonelli was exactly the same wow factor as they had from Max Verstappen. That's how good that kid appears to be.
And Mercedes don't want to let him slip through the net like they did with Max Verstappen when they had the option to sign him when he was shopping around for drives. That was the voice of the BBC's chief F1 writer Andrew Benson, alongside myself, Harry Benjamin, his racing driver Alice Powell. There's only a couple of cars out on track at the moment, the two McLarens being two of them in Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. Lots of work going on down in the garages, though, which is where we could find Rosanna Tennant.
Yeah, it's quite quiet, but there's lots of work going on. So the cars that have been out and completed a few laps have come back in. Notably, George Russell is in the garage alongside his teammate for now, Lewis Hamilton. But his Silver Arrows, George Russell, his Silver Arrow is up on the hydraulic jack, so pretty high up off the floor. Mechanics working at the front of it. There are about 4 or 5 of them on the floor, very busy under their car. And you'd kind of expect this, the drivers feeding back to their engineers and mechanics, asking for different things, different setups. So that's what's going on in the Mercedes garage at the moment. And if I walk a little bit further up towards pit in, it's the Red Bull garage. That's where I was when we started the show. And Max Verstappen's car has been having a little bit of work done to it as well. A couple of mechanics underneath there. And then the engine cover being taken off slightly. But because the car looks a bit different now, the engine cover parts are quite thin and skinny. So they were taken off and put back on. We heard Max complaining about the car, but we know that is often what the Dutchman does, and then pulls out an incredible lap time. Everything's gone back on the car now. The tyres have been put back on, and it looks like they're waiting to be sent out. Watching Max Verstappen in the Red Bull garage is Adrian Newey. He's standing in the middle of the garage, his fist underneath his chin. He's holding his notebook. He's got his headphones on. He's looking at the data on the screens, and in front of him on the other side of the car is Dr. Helmut Marko as well. As I turn around, look across the pit lane, Christian Horner still there on the pit wall, looking at the data as well. I wonder what's going through his mind. It's been a busy 48 hours or so, or 24 hours, but he is here. As I said at the start of the programme, Christian Horner is here and is still, for now, team principal of Red Bull Racing. We've got more cars heading out on track now, though, Harry, so more data, more learning going on, because we are so fresh when it comes to understanding the cars for this year, even though so many of them are just an evolution of last year's.
Yeah, absolutely. And we we will be talking more, of course, about the track action and, of course, that Christian Horner Red Bull news in our preview show, which you can hear on 5 Live this evening, 7:30 UK time on BBC Radio 5 Live. And then, of course, the Checkered Flag podcast will be available on BBC Sounds and wherever you get your podcasts. Oscar Piastri is now the fastest driver in the field. He did put on the softest rubber, the soft compound of tyre, and set a 1:33.113. Still a lot of cars in the garage. Norris out there, Stroll on an outlap as well, as is Pierre Gasly in the Alpine, who is rear wing flap flies open as he heads down the main straight. That's the drag reduction system. And then it slams shut as he hits the brakes into turn 1 in an Alpine, Alice, which seems to be struggling.
Well, yes.
I think Alice is a bit restricted on what she can say on this topic.
No. I mean, it is a totally different car to last year. Pretty much
everything but the steering wheel, isn't it?
Everything but the steering wheel. Coming into the test, I think the estimates we thought we were going to be about
pass, I would say
8th and 9th. But I don't think that's what the expectations are now. As Gasly is really struggling for grip there as he bleeds out of turn 8 now up into the tricky turn 9. No lock-ups there, so managed to get it slowed down. But it's going to be a tough start to the season, I think, for Alpine. The car has not looked like it's got any real pace to challenge where they sort of were. Okay, Gasly had a shock in qualifying last year, but he did come back up into the points here with Esteban Ocon getting how many penalties was it? Track limit penalties, speeding penalties last year. But it is going to be a long way off from certainly what they initially expected.
I think there's a really interesting question about Alpine. They made a big story at the launch about how they've completely changed the car, different philosophy, new suspension and everything feeding into that. But they realised it was going to be a slow start to the season, and they hoped they could develop further. But why have they gone backwards, having completely changed the car, is the first question. Some of the answers to that question are it's overweight, they've been late with it, they failed a crash test, but they're always late, Alpine. Why is it so overweight 3 years into a set of regulation changes? What is going on? You know, it's... And
they haven't painted the whole car either.
Exactly, that's why they haven't painted it. That was the other thing, they made this big deal about some famous artist who's helped with the colour scheme, and most of it's carbon fibre. And also the
I could have done that.
Also the power unit engine, however you want to call it, it's still the worst engine on the grid. And they don't seem to be able to find the... You know, you're not... Basically, there's supposed to be an engine freeze at the moment in Formula 1. You're allowed to make changes for reliability, but of course reliability changes are an interesting grey area, because if you make your engine more reliable, then you can run it more higher power for longer. And Mercedes, Ferrari and Honda have all found ways to gain performance under that reliability exception, whereas Alpine haven't found as much. Why? What is going wrong? And it raises the point that lots of people have been asking about the Renault Formula 1 programme, because that's what Alpine is. It's a sub-brand of Renault. For a long time, basically, pretty much since they came back in 2016, is what is the point of that programme? What are they trying to achieve?
And that is the existential question, isn't it? Of course, last year there was a little bit of up and downs with the management. Bruno Famant coming in as interim team principal at the time, once Otmar Zafnauer was out, and he has now remained as team principal with the Alpine team this year. But I think a lot of teams, especially Alpine, might look at last year and take quite a lot of hope from the likes of McLaren, because the development race last year was just as fascinating as the on-track racing was in the midfield. Let's not kid ourselves.
I was going to say, probably the development race was more fascinating.
The battle for sixth got quite good sometimes. But look at where McLaren were. Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri were piddling around at the back this time last year, and they knew their car was off the pace before they even started. Andrea Stella said, we haven't met our downforce points, but once, I think the first big upgrade they introduced was around Austria, then another one at Silverstone, and they jumped up the fields, and it was a brilliant improved result. So all is not lost. For it might not, in Alpine, the Saubers we think are around down there as well, and of course Haas as well, who are currently 19th and 20th. They've been downplaying their chances too. But that gives a lot of people hope, I think, seeing what McLaren were able to do last year.
I love your positivity.
Well, someone's got to bring it.
Positive outlook is outstanding. Well, yeah, that's all that they can hope for. Certainly, I would not like to be a designer or such in a team that is struggling with the design of the car at the moment, like Alpine appears to be. Rumours that they're actually going to be fighting down with Haas. Well, Gasly is down there at the moment. He's in 18th place. Esteban Ocon is a little bit higher in 15th. There's Yuki Tsunoda now. He's bolted. He's joined the two McLarens and bolted on a set of the soft compound tyre, purple, so that's fastest overall in the first sector, personal best in the middle sector. As he comes out the final corner, DRS flicks wide open, crosses the line and jumps up into third place. So fairly decent effort there, just shy, half a tenth shy of Oscar Piastri. As now it's getting pretty busy out on track, isn't it, guys? We've only got Alex Albon in the pits along with Sargent, Joe and Magnussen, and Piastri, and everybody else is out on track.
Yeah, it's starting to get a little bit busier now. 24 minutes and 27, 26, 25 seconds remain. The two McLarens are fastest, having put the soft tyres on first. Norris ahead of Piastri, and then, as Alice said, Tsunoda has just gone third fastest. Then it's Hamilton and Perez, the top five, but we'll expect some more quicker lap times coming in at the moment. You're just hearing the sound of George Russell going straight on down at turn one into the runoff in his Mercedes, rejoins safe and sound, doesn't manage to lock up though.
Do you want to hear a really geeky, interesting stat?
Obviously.
So, I had breakfast with James Vowles, wasn't exclusive to me, it was me and the rest of the...
I was going to say, you are dropping the names today. Look at all these meetings and breakfasts you're having.
The rest of the British media as well. And he said something that I found fascinating. He was talking about the sort of revolution that they're trying to do at Williams to turn that team around, and how much they've had to change because how far behind Williams were before, and how they're trying to get them to catch up to the latest technology in Formula One. And the example he gave, or an example that he gave, was the chassis. Last year's chassis had something like 200 and so parts in it. This year's chassis has something like 2,000 parts in it. It's all to do with the complexity of carbon fibre, load distribution, and paradoxically, although it's got 10 times more parts, it's lighter. That kind of blew my mind.
So it's all about how because obviously these certain parts have to be heavy to be strong as well, right?
Not always.
Not necessarily.
Doesn't look like it, Max. Okay, let's have talk 6 for the next lap.
I think we're struggling to hear that just as much as you are, don't you worry? I think that's Verstappen and Gianpiero Lambiase, his engineer, just having a chat and debriefing as Verstappen is now back on and out on the track. Well, yeah, okay, not in a complete blanket sense, but surely, some of the weight has to be proportioned to allowing these parts to be strong enough to withstand certain forces, and is the key then trying to make that as light as possible before it becomes a little bit unstable.
So how you use carbon fibre has a huge effect on how that carbon fibre behaves. So you can use carbon fibre in a loudspeaker, for example, or you can use it in a racing car. And in the racing car you can have it as light as you possibly can get it, which you might want in certain parts of the car. Other parts of the car you want really structural stiffness. Take the driver, for example. And then how does it protect the driver? What happens to it when it gets hit by something, a barrier or another car or whatever? And all those things can be changed depending on your level of ability to manipulate carbon fibre technology. So that's what Vowles is talking about. And so if the better you are at that, the more advanced your technology is, the more able you are to get the carbon fibre to do the same things but way less.
Okay. Well, I mean, that is fascinating. And actually, I was listening to a podcast on the way here. It's a BBC podcast where they have this very exact conversation insight, and it's available on the Checkered Flag feed. It's called F1 Back at Base with F1 broadcaster Holly Samos and F1 journalist Sarah Holt getting unprecedented access to Mercedes and Williams over the course of the winter. It's a really insightful podcast, and they do bring up this exact conversation as well about working with the hundreds of thousands of parts that go into making up a Formula One car. We don't see them because they're covered by the outer bodywork. So do check that out if you can. 20 minutes and 29 seconds remaining of free practice 1. Kevin Magnussen in the Haas just comes across the line and he goes faster, but it's still 19th. Hulkenberg is 20th, and that's some of the bigger news we haven't covered off. Gunther Steiner's not here. Team principal gone.
Exactly. Well, he is here, though.
Well, there he is. And he's being followed once again by the old Netflix crew as well. Aya Komatsu steps up as team principal. How did you look at that move, Andrew? Aya Komatsu coming from the more technical backgrounds, coming into a team principal role. Much like, I suppose, Lauren Mecky's switching from Ferrari, going over to head up the RB operation as well. We're seeing this move a bit more and more in Formula One.
Team principals are getting more and more technical. Look at James Vowles, for example. Look at Andrea Stella. Aya Komatsu is another example. I have to say, Gunther Steiner's created a big profile for himself. He's a really nice, interesting character. Really nice guy, funny. I like him very much as a person. Not everybody in Formula One has a massive amount of respect for him as a team principal. That's fair to say, I think. Equally, the justification for removing him and promoting Aya Komatsu was that you had an engineer leading the team, which Steiner isn't. The problem is that the man who was director of engineering, the reason the change was made was because they weren't making progress with the car. And the person in charge of the progress with the car was Aya Komatsu. So that is a little bit hard to get your head around. And the thing I was going to say before you started this conversation, looking at the lap times, okay, it's only first practice and everything. Goodness me, Haas looks slow. They're nearly 2 seconds off the back of the field.
I was wondering, surely they've not done a proper finish lap.
They must be
They did say in testing as well that they were only purely focusing on how their tyres react to the car, and they would continue that throughout free practice as well before they even looked at finding kind of pace.
Okay, and it's a fair point. It certainly would make sense for them to be running with high fuel loads at the moment, because in the race condition is where they were most struggling. They basically, I can understand why Gene Haas, the team owner, wanted to make changes, because basically Haas have been in Formula 1 since 2016 and they've had the same problem the whole time. The car's been quite quick in qualifying sometimes, but it just goes backwards like a stone falling through a Scottish lock in the races. And nothing was changing. So Gene Haas had to do something, I think, was where it started. I don't know Aya Komatsu personally. I'm told he's a very nice guy. I'm sure he's a very good engineer. He's very experienced. He's been around lots of teams, including Renault, Alice. Yeah. But whether he can... I think there's a bigger question around that as to whether the team is set up in the right way, whether they're approaching Formula One in the right way, whether Gene Haas is putting enough resources into it, and as a result of all those questions, whether it can actually genuinely make progress.
Could you see a scenario where, because again the other off-season news that kind of went under the radar quite quickly, because then Hamilton announced he'd signed for Ferrari, was that Andretti, who were the sole team still in the running to gain an entry into Formula One, were denied that for 2025 and 2026 by Formula One. Obviously an American team, a lot of people are quite disappointed at that outcome, but Haas being an American team as well, and this is the only pure link I find, could we see an instance where Gene Haas decides, you know what, I do not want to put any more money into this operation. Andretti have a top-tier operation, it seems, ready to go. Could they just buy Haas?
Well, look, the American thing is a red herring in this context, because Andretti already have a base in Fisher, Indiana, that they're building. And Haas, although its headquarters is in North Carolina, it's not really an American team other than in name, in the sense that the car is designed between their base in Bicester, in Oxfordshire, or is it Buckinghamshire? I should know, I live in Buckinghamshire.
I thought they were in Banbury.
Haas are in Banbury.
Banbury, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's RB that are in Bicester, isn't it?
We'll come on to that in a minute.
And Maranello, where they have a sort of a part of the Ferrari factory which is supposed to have Chinese walls between it and the Haas section and the Ferrari section. But it's still a Formula One team entry, and it's very clear that if Michael Andretti wants to get into Formula One before 2028, when Formula One have said he can come in with if GM build their projected engine with the Cadillac brand that they're partnering with Andretti for, then it'll have to be by buying another team, which would be the obvious contenders at the moment would be Haas and Alpine, because we discussed Alpine earlier, and you could raise the same questions about Haas, as in fact I just did. But there's no indication at the moment that Gene Haas or Renault want to sell either of those teams. So Andretti at the moment are kind of stuck in a bit of a holding pattern.
Bit of cat and mouse happening on the circuit the last few moments between George Russell and Verstappen in the Red Bull, overtaking each other, coming through turns 11, 12, 13, as you get uphill, flat out through turn 12, then into turn 13, which takes you down the back straight towards the final. It's technically 2 corners, but turn 15 is really taken flat out. It's now Daniel Ricciardo who's currently fast. He said that a few moments ago. He's now in the pits on the soft compounder tyre, 132.8 in front of Norris, Piastri, Tsunoda, Verstappen, the top 5, Russell, Leclerc, Hamilton, Bottas, Sainz, the top 10, Perez, Albon, Zhou, Alonso, Stroll, the top 15, Ocon, Gasly, Sargent, Magnussen and Hülkenberg, the top 20, and the top 4 times are on that soft compounder tyre. The 2 Saubers also setting their lap times on that soft, everybody else on the medium. But it's Ricciardo on top, ahead of his first full season since he left McLaren. Of course, came back partway through last year into the AlphaTauri team, then suffered that injury in Zandvoort. Liam Lawson came in to replace him for a few rounds, got back in it. AlphaTauri made a huge rate of development, didn't they, Alice, in those last few rounds? And it was a real nip and tuck between them and Williams for that 7th in the Constructors. Ultimately, the good work was done by Williams early on in the season with Alex Albon to secure that just. Bit of a name change over the winter. Here's Esteban Ocon. Super inconsistent. We can barely hear this, so we're just going to talk over it. Super inconsistent in the car at the moment is what Esteban Ocon is saying and reporting back to his engineer. Name change for AlphaTauri to RB, closer links to Red Bull. They didn't have quite close links already. In fact, they even share some of the same parts now. Same suspension and gearboxes as Red Bull. And that has brought up a lot of questions, particularly Zach Brown from McLaren has been very vocal on this. He doesn't like it one bit. What are your thoughts on it when we see Ricciardo at the top of the timings?
Took the words straight out of my mouth about Zach Brown. He's not been particularly happy at all regarding this. And you know what? I kind of understand, because these are technically, it's an A and a B team, isn't it? With Red Bull Racing, so Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez, the A, and then the B is the RBs in Ricciardo and Tsunoda. So I get it, because they will work closely, they can share data, they can share information, they will have the added help from RB's car, RB will have the added help from learning from Red Bull's car themselves. The data that, of course, every other team on the grid won't have access to and won't have help with. So I do understand the frustration, certainly from the other teams, but I'm sure if they were in a position to do it, they would do the same, if that makes sense. So it swings and roundabouts, doesn't it? And as I said, if they were in that position, I'm sure they would be quite happy to share information and gather information off Red Bull, or have a sister team.
I mean, they've always been the B team. I mean, Toro Rosso is Italian, isn't it, for Red Bull? So they've always been the B team, bringing up the young Red Bull drivers. But I think people are now concerned that, well, that B team now doesn't seem like it's fighting for occasional points. It now seems like it could well be challenging the upper midfield, which is where a lot of the team principals start to have a gripe with. The other thing, and Andrew brought it up briefly earlier on, was talking about these HQs. Toro Rosso, AlphaTauri, RB, main headquarters is in Faenza in Italy. They do have a base in Bista, but I believe they are now going to be having a new base in the UK. They've outgrown Bicester, and that's going to be in Milton Keynes, which is where Red Bull is.
Yeah, it's on the Red Bull campus. Yeah.
Well, I read a quote where Lauren Meckie said it will be outside the Red Bull campus. Does that mean what? Just the other side of the fence, is it? Or there's a ring road in between? But when you put that on paper, it doesn't look good, does it?
No, it looks a bit sus. And as sort of Zach Brown also put it, is you wouldn't have that in any other sport like football, wouldn't you? You wouldn't have Arsenal hooking up with Tottenham. You know, let's work together to get ourselves a bit further up the table. That certainly won't be happening at all. But it's happening in some ways in Formula 1 with one of the teams already right at the top, and RB dragging themselves up the order. The sound you can hear now is riding on board with Fernando Alonso, who seemed very chill coming in the paddock yesterday, very smart in a nice suit, as he does a personal best in the middle sector, but not a personal best in the first sector. Currently on the medium compound of tyre, as he heads down now to the final corner, jumps on the brakes, hooks it round just nicely, and then you open up the DRS and storm across the line. Expect this to jump him up the order, and it does. And actually, that's a fairly decent lap time from Alonso, who's on the medium compound tyre, jumps up into 5th place. However, the track is evolving. We are seeing this, and I know people go, oh, okay, yeah, track evolution, but it will make a difference with the win that we've got here
it's not
this
necessarily
weekend.
Track evolution. It's like these are unrepresentative lap times, right? You know,
Yes.
I'm seeing we're just logging into the hashtag BBC F1, so thank you for getting in touch. And you know, I think Andrews and Andrew saying and a couple of others are Red Bull sandbagging, because where are they at the moment on the timing screens? Perez down in 12th, Verstappen in 6th, but this isn't the time qualifying is going to be. It's going to be under the lights. It's going to be cooler. We don't know what the wind will be either. So it is unrepresentative, these lap times. We can read a little bit into them, but I wouldn't go all out and say, well, that's the pecking order as it is right now. Ricardo, then it's the McLarens, then it's Fernando Alonso. I think we'll have to, unfortunately, be on the edge of our seats until qualifying is when we'll know truly what the outcome will be. Verstappen is out there going for another lap on the medium compound of tyre. 8 minutes and 15, 14, 13 seconds remain of this free practice 1 session to kick off the 2024 season and the 2024 Bahrain Grand Prix. Who else caught your eye over the winter? The fluoro green Saubers certainly caught mine. What do you make of that?
I find they look like
livery?
they've got, which probably is a bit insulting to whoever designed the livery, but it almost looks like paint has been spilt on the back of the car, doesn't it? You always think, oh, they're doing a fluoro test, and then it's like, oh no, that's just the livery. As Max Verstappen continues and actually not setting a fast lap time. Maybe they are sandbagging, or maybe he's just doing a gear sync to try and get that gearbox singing once again. Who else caught my eye in terms of liveries?
Well, anything really. I mean, let's go Sauber then, because Bottas at the moment is in 10th. Joe down in 15th. Both continuing through with what was Alfa Romeo. Sauber now, we're going with Sauber as their name. That's what we'll be calling them for the next couple of seasons. You want to call them Kick Sauber? It's just a bit of a mouthful, isn't it, really? But then they become...
Sorry, not allowed. Sponsors. BBC.
Oh, there you go. BBC can't do it.
There you go. Thank BBC Chief F1 writer Andrew Benson there.
Hey, Sauber.
Look.
Why are you trying to confuse it? Just call them Sauber, for goodness sake.
I'm winding you up, Andrew.
The thing is, though, it is interesting when you think about it, because Alfa Romeo were technically a sponsor, right? It wasn't an Alfa Romeo designed car. But let's not dig that one up now.
We're going to
call them Sauber, because then they're going to become Audi.
I've spent much of the winter discussing this.
I tell you what has kind of caught my eye. Well, not more coming from last year, and something that I want to keep an eye on is the battle between Norris and Piastri. But they're sitting pretty up there in second and third at the moment. 2/10 Piastri is off Lando Norris. Okay, Piastri, he could say, well, he did his time on the soft tyre a little bit earlier than his teammate. But it's going to be interesting. Piastri's got a year under his belt now, and I think what a year he had last year coming in as a rookie up against Lando, who's certainly cemented himself nicely in that McLaren team from the very start. And there was
won a sprint race, of course, as well.
Yeah, of course, there were sort of, I would say, signs of maybe Norris, under a bit of pressure from Piastri, and maybe overdriving, going past the limit of the car, which we hadn't really seen when Ricciardo was in that seat. But of course, when a young driver comes in and is almost matching you really for pace, that will of course in itself add some pressure. So with Piastri, he's got a bit more of an understanding now. Like I said, a year under his belt, more understanding of the tyre. It's going to be interesting to see the dynamic between these two drivers. There's some fans getting very excited seeing themselves on the TV.
Yeah, it's great to see the grandstands. Here's Lance Stroll saying the car is super snappy in turns 1 and 2. It's horrendous. So Lance Stroll not happy in his Aston Martin. He's currently down in 14th at the moment and just had a bit of a bumpy ride coming through turns 1 and 2 as Charles Leclerc has a little lock-up as well further around the lap.
The wind has changed ever so slightly. I'm using the big Bahraini and FIA and F1 flags outside our commentary box window. Plus, when we started the session, the wind has now picked up by about 3 kilometres an hour. So we are seeing an increase of wind, and we're seeing those sort of gusts as well. So that's probably why several of the drivers are on the radio, and actually that's what Esteban Ocon's engineer said to him as well. He said, it's the gusts, mate. Everyone's struggling with them, and it looks like Lance Stroll is as well.
It is very gusty out there. Coming back to that McLaren chat, the one, I suppose, weakness that Oscar Piastri had last year, and you very much alluded to it, was his race pace. He would chew up his tyres and fall back. Brilliant one-lap pace once the upgrade came into McLaren. And I think in pre-season testing, McLaren didn't really see much of long-run work for the McLarens, apart from one run that Piastri did towards the end of pre-season testing, which was here in Bahrain last week, and the timings didn't look good. I think him and Alonso, same tyre, both going on long runs, and Alonso's Aston Martin, smooth as you like, Piastri just losing time and time and time, and that, I think that is going to be a bit of a worry for McLaren this season. Is it might not just be Piastri, it might be the car where the long run pace is maybe a little bit unsettling, but Piastri needs to get his head on top of understanding these tyres and making sure that he can perform just as well as we all know he can with that long run pace, because you don't score points on qualifying day.
Yeah, you don't, and a lot of people have said, well, surely if you're trying to look after a tyre, you just drive a bit gently, just take it a bit easier, be a bit more cautious on the tyre. But your degradation can not only have an effect on how you drive the tyre during this run, but it also can have an effect on how you bring in the tyre. So that's a massive part of junior categories, and actually Oscar was really good at it in F3 and F2. Especially the jump he made from Formula 3 to Formula 2, how the process of bringing in the tyre, okay, it is all sort of the same, but at the same time it is a different tyre, a much bigger tyre, but he adapted brilliantly to that jump and bringing in the tyre. But if you don't bring in the tyre correctly, that can then have consequences down the line with degradation. This will of course have an effect in Formula 1, but it's more outstanding in the junior categories. But for Oscar, he's got a great mentor in Mark Webber, who's had plenty of experience with tyres and long races in Formula 1. So certainly it'll be something Oscar is working, or would have worked extremely hard throughout the winter, as Max Verstappen once again is on the radio saying very inconsistent shifts. That'll be on the gearbox, and his engineer comes back and says, understood. So Max, not particularly happy at the moment with the car, unsettling with the downshifts, which can have an effect certainly for coming into a corner, and you're downshifting quite late and it could snag a little bit and snap the rear, and you don't want that. Sometimes that can help, and you deliberately change down late to get the car rotated, but he obviously doesn't want that kind of feeling at the moment. So he's just going around, not really setting the world on light, probably just gathering plenty of data at the moment for his team to dive into and try and fix that problem, Harry. So that's actually one thing we discussed earlier, didn't we? That Red Bull could be beaten.
We cling on to some hope.
Could be. I'm clinging on with hope that their reliability doesn't seem at the moment, at this stage in time, to be as good as it was last year, with Perez having a few problems in testing. Was it a fuel pump issue, I think, on one of the days? And obviously Max now, I know he's complained a lot in the past about downshifts, but this is an hour of running now, pretty much, and it's not been solved.
No, it hasn't. So clearly a little bit more work to do for a lot of the teams here. Just having a quick glimpse out of the commentary box, and can see Ferrari just having a little tweak with some front wings that are stacked outside of their garage. Both cars on track at the moment. Indeed, everybody is on track with the exception of Alex Albon in the Williams, who won't make it out again because there's only 3 seconds left of this free practice 1 session as Daniel Ricciardo in the RB comes across the line, just takes the flag. Oh, actually, no, the flag came out just after, so he gets another lap if he wants it. We might see some practice starts as well, as the teams will want to lay a little bit of rubber down on the grid spots to try and make sure there is as much grip as possible added throughout the course of the weekend. But it is worth emphasising that this is a little bit of an unrepresentative session. You'll hear that time and time again until we get under the lights, and that will be for the next session, which is at 6 o'clock local time. So that'll be on 5 Sports Extra from 2:55 this afternoon. But FP1, and at the end of that, to kickstart the 2024 F1 season, it's Daniel Ricciardo, fastest in the RB, a 1:32.869. The 2 McLarens behind, Norris and Piastri in third. Tsunoda, Alonso are the top 5. Verstappen, Russell, Leclerc, Hamilton, Bottas the top 10. Sainz, Perez, Albon, Stroll, Zhou the top 15. Sargent, Ocon, Gasly, Magnussen and Hulkenberg is 20th and last.
Thank you very much, Harry and Alice and Andrew up in the commentary box. I've been down in the pit lane. It's been a hive of activity. And as Harry said, it's Daniel Ricciardo in the RB, topping the timesheets. The first session of 2024 is done and dusted. So what can we read into this, or can we not? Do we have to wait till FP2, guys?
Yeah, I think so. I think, well, look, we can take, we were mentioning reliability right at the end there, so we can read a little bit into that. Perhaps there's a little bit of trouble brewing in paradise at Red Bull, but we've heard Max Verstappen on the radio not liking a lot of things on that Red Bull last year, and then he'll go fastest come qualifying day. So look, I think it is a case of let's wait and see. Once the sun goes down and the lights come on, temperature cools slightly, then we'll get a little bit more of an inkling ahead of qualifying tomorrow.
And of course it was the 2 RBs, the 2 McLarens and the 2 Saubers that ran the soft tyres. And the big hitters, the likes of Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez, the Ferraris of Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz, and the Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton and George Russell not choosing to run that soft tyre. So I guess avoiding that in the unrepresentative conditions. But when the sun sets here and the lights come on and we get down to business in FP2, that's when they're going to try this soft tyre out. And how much is that going to be worth, Alice, around a track like this?
I mean, yes, it's... I think the main thing here is this session is a little bit irrelevant, and that is because the conditions that we are going to have later on in free practice 2 are going to be much more similar to what we will experience later on in qualifying tomorrow, should I say. So I'm almost looking at these times and I'm not getting too excited, and I'm not going to say, oh, that's going to help this team or this is going to help, because at the moment I think the conditions are going to change quite a lot, and the wind already, Rosanna, I mean, you're still out there so you'll be able to tell us, but according to our timing screens here in the comms box has now dropped since the session has finished by 5 kilometres an hour as the drivers are lining up on the grid doing their practice starts.
Yeah, I was worried I was going to find myself at the top of the Ferris wheel, such with a gust during that session, and the drivers complaining of it as well. Drivers on the start-finish straight practicing their starts. Max Verstappen, one of them. He was the man to beat coming into this season. He hasn't run the soft tyre. He's been complaining a little bit. We don't write him off. Is he still going to be at the sharp end of the grid come Sunday evening, or Saturday evening, sorry, because of course we race on Saturday here in Bahrain. He's had a bit of trouble getting the car going actually there, Alice.
Yeah, I'm just looking. I think he opted to do a practice start further down the grid, and went for it for some reason. Maybe something was overheating and he had to go, but the actual rule is you're not allowed to do a practice start when there is a car in front of you. And it looked like one of the McLarens, I think, was it, in front of him. And Max did a start for whatever reason and then had to slow down because there was a McLaren in front of him that was already there on the grid. So, I mean, in junior categories, that'll be a penalty. So we'll see what happens there. Already we could start that. Oh, it's, people say, oh, it's Red Bull, they'll be fine, but who knows? We'll wait and see.
We'll keep an eye on that during the gap between FP1 and FP2. So the 2024 F1 season is well and truly underway. We will be back at 3 o'clock UK time for the second practice session, when the sun will have set, the temperature will have dropped a little more, and the lights will come on around the Bahrain International Circuit. It was Daniel Ricciardo who topped the timesheets for RB in the first session, followed by the two McLarens, Lando Norris ahead of Oscar Piastri. Will it be the same come FP2? Join us then. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.